It's no secret that the MMO genre has become a bit of a barren wasteland, with fans feeling let down by titans like World of Warcraft, newer releases like Amazon's New World missing the mark, and the alternatives serving as a kind of placeholder until something better comes out. Today we're going to be looking at Lost Ark, an isometric MMO that recently dropped in the West, and given the state of the genre, it's no surprise that players flooded to the servers. But is it any good? Lost Ark is a Korean-made isometric MMO, set in a fictional fantasy universe where the forces of good are locked in battle with the forces of evil. And when you first jump in, you can pick from a handful of classes and different specializations. It's worth noting here that there are some gender-locked classes, which I personally really do not like, but Next doesn't really mind so much. You then customize your character with an impressive level of detail, and if you're a fan of face sliders, you're in for a treat. When you're happy with your hero, you're then put into a training area to try all of the different subclasses and you're good to go. And unfortunately for us, this is where the problems began. Having both sunk hours into the game, the combat doesn't get anything past mind-numbingly easy, especially at lower levels where the game is supposed to hook you in. It's not that the game's mechanically bad or feels bad, the skills actually feel really smooth, and mechanically there are a lot of great things going on. It's just way too easy. The first boss gave us a glimmer of hope that the bosses in this game will be mechanically complex. You'll have to think about what you're doing, and they're hard to kill compared to the enemies, which up to that point had simply been ants under the boot. But the bosses just die, and they die quickly. To give this some context, we ended up entering dungeons solo for the most part, not because we wanted to, but because of the awful party system, and the inability of the game to allow us to enter as a team for the most part. But even solo, we one-manned 4-man dungeons, and we did it on hard mode. And on hard mode, the bosses didn't even make us think about what we were doing. However, credit where credit's due, the skills do feel good, the aesthetics are good, but the whole thing is dull, really dull. The world, while vibrant, feels pretty dull. The questing is dull, and the entire world building is the age-old trope of good versus evil. From what we could see, it's a pretty cookie-cutter storyline lacking any soul, plot hooks, or the stakes to make the player feel invested. The story does take a turn for the better around level 26 or so, but by that point it's a little bit too late, and many players looking for something more would probably have stopped playing by then. In addition, trying to form a party is something akin to using sandpaper as toilet paper, and there are a lot of areas which are solo only, so you're forced to break the party and go in alone, in an MMO. Then to rub salt in the wounds caused by all that sandpaper, when you're ready to leave the solo zones and rejoin your friends, the game consistently puts party members into random channels, forcing you to load yet again into your friend's channel. These are just a few of the minor annoyances that build up to an overall irritating experience. Before release, the game was sitting at an impressive overwhelmingly positive on Steam, filling isometric game fans with hope and excitement. However, since then the reviews fell down to mixed and have now risen to mostly positive. As always, if you like this kind of content, feel free to leave a like, or if you want to stay with us for a while and join the community, you can hit the sub button below. It helps us out and lets us know what you guys like to see and what you don't like to see.
If you're into MMOs, isometric dungeon crawlers, or maybe even both together, then there is a good chance you've had Lost Ark on your radar. A top-down action MMO released in South Korea in December 2019. It's been long awaited in the West for its reputation of good combat, and we were extremely keen to jump in to let you know what we think. The demand on release was certainly unprecedented. Players were met with unacceptably long queue times, and when you finally do get in, you're met with an explosive class selection screen, with what first looked like cutscene showcases of the classes themselves, and what we'd come to find is actually how they look in game too. As Bias mentioned, there are a selection of classes locked into a specific gender, which will of course cause a split of opinions from the get-go. The character creation itself is relatively thorough, tons of preset options along with the opportunity to give yourself those main character features that don't necessarily match the grain of textures you see in game, but gives every player the chance to make their character look unique. After the most budget intro scene we've ever come across of low-res images and an overused digital zoom, you finally get to move around and try out which advanced class you wish to pick. For my female gunner, there was no other option than the gunslinger, but for the male you could pick artillerist, deadeye or sharpshooter, and for Bias's warrior, he could pick berserker, paladin or gunlancer. The variety of classes overall seem well rounded, with the assassins, mages and martial artists to try out in addition to our gunner and warrior picks. Combat in my opinion is shockingly good, the animations are smooth, and although being locked in place by most abilities takes some getting used to, once you get the hang of it you realise it's good design with regards to telegraphing in both PvP and PvE. Every class has their own weapon or weapon combinations, with some being able to swap between weapons for a good mixture of skills to use. This enhances the flow of play in a way that builds combat into our muscle memory rather quickly. The game itself is click to move, kind of MOBA style, but with plenty of abilities more akin to an MMO. The combination of both works well despite playing mostly across a 2D plane, where there are numerous ways to express yourself and an extremely high skill cap for players to aim for. There are a large amount of CC abilities coupled with decent mobility, which makes combat rather fast-paced and extremely reactive. The game is all open world outside a number of instance activities, story-specific scenarios, dungeons and PvP. As a PvPer mainly myself, my first goal was to reach level 26. Here I could jump straight into some arena modes where all stats are equalised to an even playing field. Something you don't see all too often and is greatly appreciated by PvP communities that aren't into PvE. The PvP itself was ridiculously hard in the first game, but you quickly get a feel for the necessary positioning, and I must say the quality of play here is fantastic, and something I may just invest my spare time into. The leveling experience is unfortunately rather one-dimensional, with a mindlessly relentless pursuit of the next quest marker broken up by the pretty enjoyable combat and a myriad of MMO-type activities like mini storyline scenarios and filling your inventory with random items you aren't sure you'll ever use. The scenarios aren't much to write home about, however occasionally you find yourself in a truly epic, well put together instance. The first one just as you get to the first main city for the game. Here you journey across an epic Helm's Deep-like setting, slaying armies, and it actually got me into the storyline for the first time. This opened up a wide-eyed hope for the potential the game had to offer, an online game that had the quality of a decent RPG. Much to our despair, once you hit the main city, you're back to your fetch and A and B quests for longer than you want until you get to their next bit of quality content. For the rest of the PvE experience, players get mounts to reduce the burden of your ultra-marathon quests, as well as teleport locations that can be discovered around the map, and pets that will aid you in various ways. Eventually, you'll even get your very own island, where you have many menus of customization to unlock features and buildings. Something we didn't spend much time on as it's not our thing, but it's there if it's something you're into. PvE post-max level will have you running the likes of dungeons, towers and raids. All of this filters into quite an intricate gearing system that is a whole video in itself. As it stands, the endgame PvE and PvP are experiences to be recommended, but our experience of the general game whilst leveling paints a different story. Both of us were immediately met with camera bugs and were about to find trying to play together a true test of our patience. First off, the UI is a multitude of menus and interfaces to a complexity not seen in most MMOs. As a new player, this made even creating a party a confusing experience. However, something any player invested in the game would find themselves learning over time. When we did eventually party up, we found ourselves in different channels, which are basically a different instance of the same place, pretty much 90% of the time we played together. This meant whenever we entered a new zone, a pretty frequent measure as you're countlessly sent all over the place, one of us would have to rezone into the other person's channel. Some of the scenarios can only be played solo, and some you can group in, at least by design, because we weren't able to join these group scenarios due to in-game errors. They're also hard to manage because any party-wide action performed by a player is updated to your party about 5 seconds after you initiated it. You send an invite, 5 seconds. Start matchmaking for a scenario, 5 seconds. Despite the actual gameplay for us being relatively lag-free, this weird interface delay didn't feel good to use. The final annoyance for us was the quests themselves. Some of us don't mind fetch A and B quests, but not all our progress is shared within the party, leaving us to compete with one another or at least have to wait up longer so that we could all press on to the next area at the same time. There have been countless other players suffering from lag during gameplay, but it's something that didn't really affect us with little to no rubber banding or syncing issues. All in all, the Lost Ark experience was a truly mixed bag. The PvP was a high quality experience, as were certain aspects of the PvE, but it makes us question what we're willing to go through for a game. The combat mechanics are incredibly nice in my opinion, but everything else you have to drag yourself through to get there may not be worth it to a certain type of player.
Prior to release, Lost Ark seemed to be a game that a lot of different people were excited for. Whether it was fans of isometric RPGs, hash and slash games, or MMOs, there was a fair amount of hype surrounding the game, and a lot of people were speaking positively about it. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to have lived up to the hype. The gameplay loop brings nothing new to the table, and while the combat is mechanically good, its application to the game and the enemies you face mean that for the most part it's dull, with the occasional fun boss encounter. In addition to all of this, for an MMO, it was one of the worst party systems I've ever seen, making it extremely frustrating to group up with friends, difficult to stay grouped up, and extremely inconsistent in how it allows you to play content together. To its credit, the graphics and art style are really nice. The world looks great despite not feeling alive or interesting, and the character customization is pretty good when it comes to choosing your face and style. But it falls down on almost every metric that matters for a good game for us, with the exception of PvP, and for this reason it's one we can't recommend. This might be one to look at if you're willing to grind through the early game and go straight for the PvP, or you just really love the genre and the things we've mentioned so far are easy for you to look past. Let us know down below what you think of the game. We're the Bullet Sponges, and we'll see you in the next one.